Avatar is absolutely amazing, a perfect gem, honestly, and I absolutely love discussing forbidden bending techniques. Let's see.
During Aang's heartbreaking trip back to the Southern Air Temple early in the series, he comes across the skeleton of his former mentor, Monk Gyatso. This leads Aang into a furious rage, sending him into the Avatar state. But how did Monk Gyatso kill all of these firebenders in such a tight space? Well, there's a crazy theory that explains that, and it might...
I have two theories for this, by the way, because speculation is fun. So, one is he has some kind of air compression technique. Literally compress air and release it and explode it in front of people. But the bones of of the Fire Nation that we saw there don't really support that too much. So, it's gonna be some kind of, most likely, AoE huge vacuum technique. You know, you suck all the air out of everything, and the Air Nation literally boils alive. Because that's what happens in space. Heat can't escape your body because there's no air. We actually release the heat from our bodies through air. And if that's it, and I think he did that.
make you look at Monk Gyatso in a totally different light. He may have used a highly forbidden and secretive technique known only to the absolute masters of the airbending art. Hit that subscribe button and let's break it down. Okay, so this theory has been going around for years, but I believe that Monk Gyatso used a similar technique to Zahir from The Legend of Korra to suck all of the air out of the room and take out all of the Fire Nation soldiers, but tragically also himself.
It does seem like the most plausible idea at the end of the day, doesn't it? Like, what else are you honestly gonna do?
All or nothing move. As the Fire Nation troops surrounded him, he made peace with his decision and quietly sat down, knowing what he was about to do. So here's why. First of all, his clothing is completely unburned. They aren't scorched or charred in any way, which is ridiculous when there are dozens of bodies piled up around him. It's simply not possible for them to have fought him without fire. That leads us on to the next point. All of the bodies of the Fire Nation soldiers are piled up around Monk Gyatso. If he used airbending to kill them in the traditional way, their bodies would have been thrown all around the room and certainly not all piled together right next to him. Next is that we know this type of...
So he's saying essentially whatever he did, they literally just all fell down to the ground, pretty much.
Bending is certainly possible from Zahir and the Earth Queen in The Legend of Korra. In that show, he was able to suck the air directly out of the Earth Queen's lungs, leading her to suffocate horribly. Now, Zahir was certainly a very...
Now, that does seem true, but that took a while. Plus, it was very, very limited in scope. So this needs to be something like that, but way, way bigger.
Skilled and powerful bender, but I'd argue that Monk Gyatso was probably even stronger and certainly much more experienced. This would allow him to control much larger volumes of air in the fine-grained and precise way needed to suck the air out of lungs, or to completely clear a room of oxygen. And because of his huge experience and extreme mastery of airbending, Gyatso probably discovered this technique deep in written air nomad history, combining it with his own skills and knowledge. He certainly never would have taught Aang such a dark technique, firstly because of how dark and malicious it was, but also simply because it wasn't ready. This explains pretty perfectly why it was never mentioned in the show and why Aang didn't know that that's what happened. He would have no idea that something like this could even be achieved with airbending. As for how the exact events went down, well, here's how I think it happened. As the firebenders approached the top of the mountain, already having killed hundreds of air nomads on the way up, they were probably feeling invincible. Completely emboldened by their previous successes and the immense power of the comet, they probably marched straight into the room with Gyatso and glanced upon a frail old monk. They thought they had an extremely easy kill lined up and basically played with their food, taunting and teasing the old man. But then, out of nowhere, Gyatso launches both arms out from his center and...
that's just making the Fire Nation a little bit more evil than they are. They probably just entered the room and thought, well, this is it? Okay, well, and... boop.
A piercing gust of air rings out through the room before total and complete silence. Now, there was no air. The soldiers fall into a deep panic, and they all immediately launch their bolts of fire at him, but to no avail. Their bending no longer works because without air, there cannot be fire. On top of this, just like Iroh says, firebending comes from the breath. Without breath, they cannot generate fire. Gyatso has shown these firebenders the importance of balance and that all elements rely on each other, whether or not they realize it. Gyatso then holds this technique until all of the firebenders around him drop to the ground, then he too falls, bringing an end to the air nomads, at least until the boy in the iceberg returns. Now, one other point to this theory is the question...
The strange part honestly seems like that you think that actually fits the story well, but honestly it doesn't. It honestly just does not. The fact that he would actually commit, what effectively amounts to like a double suicide in this case, I guess. It's kind of a little bit hard to buy. Because, well, monks are supposed to be peaceful, but they're supposed to seek perfectionism, which does make sense that he would learn, like, techniques like that. But, at the same time, well, it's not like they want, they would definitely not just, take it lying down, They would actually fight, which makes this a little bit more interesting, like, do you really think that he would have been so down on his luck, so absolutely done with everything that he just does that? I don't know. Seems strange. Also, if he learned that art, he would have obviously learned it and understood. Wait a minute, I also have nothing to breed. So he would perfect it so he can breed. So it doesn't happen around him at the very minimum, which makes it even more sus. Which makes it even more strange.
And if Gyatso is able to control the air all around the room, would he not just be able to keep a small bubble around his own head? The first explanation to this could be that this is a pretty obscure and only theoretical technique taught in the ancient and almost lost air nomad archives. Obviously, Gyatso had never used the technique before and probably swore to only use it as a last resort. Because of this, he wouldn't have been able to learn the fine control needed to keep the air bubble around his own head while draining the rest of the room. That's a pretty fair and balanced drawback to this technique. If this was a game, that would be a pretty fair balancing change. It's also possible that such a technique demanded something in return spiritually from its user. We know the air nomads were exceptionally spiritual, which is why almost all of them were born as airbenders. This means that there is a clear connection between bending and spirituality. Now, with that in mind, maybe this technique caused such an imbalance that when it was used, it demanded the life of its user. Another much darker...
That sounds... I don't know, for me that sounds extremely implausible. I mean, there's a chance, maybe, but, I doubt it.
A possibility was simply that Gyatso had given up. With him believing that Aang was dead and the rest of his people wiped out, what point was there continuing in the physical world? He may have believed that he could transcend the physical world and do more good from the other side. Now, something to add to this is that this technique has been foreshadowed in the lore of Avatar: The Last Airbender. With the release of the recent Dawn of Yang Chen novel, we have some pretty good foreshadowing of this specific bending technique and why Gyatso may very likely have used it against the firebenders. To give you a quick recap, in that novel, Yang Chen is very fixated on solving the class divide between the richest and poorest citizens of the Earth Kingdom, something that was a massive problem during her time. At the heart of this problem was an Earth Kingdom town named...
Well, you can guess if she succeeded. Not really, no.
Bin-Er. Now, the reason this city was so important was because of a huge diplomatic dispute between all four nations known as the Platinum Affair. This was a shockingly bad blunder from the Air, Water and Fire nations where they basically tried to support a rebellion against the Earth King by sending the rebels Platinum. The Earth Kingdom defeated the rebels and stole the Platinum for himself, but in anger at the other nations for funding the rebels, he completely shut down the Earth Kingdom. He closed all ports, trading routes and outposts and declared that the Earth Kingdom would be isolated until a statue made from the Platinum tarnished. That is over 100 years. But despite that, his royal court still had desires for foreign imported Fire Nation goods, so there were still a few cities set up as the only places where international goods could be traded. One of them was Bin-Er. These international trade cities were extremely corrupt, however, and were run completely by noble and rich families known as the Shanks. Now, because of this, as you can imagine, there were huge tensions between the working class people of the city and the ruling Shanks. This is where Avatar Yang Chen comes in. Yang Chen discovers a horrifying plan called the Unanimity Project, which hoped to centralize all of the power of the Earth Kingdom in the few designated trade cities, making the Shangs the rulers of the whole Earth Kingdom. Yang Chen wasn't going to let this stand, however, so she assembled a small team of trusted benders and went deep into Bin-Er. In this process, they discover that involved in Project Unanimity were actually a group of 3 incredibly dangerous combustion benders who were being used to take the trade cities with extreme force and fear.
More combustion benders. Gee.
This is awesome in itself, as it gives a much further back perspective on combustion benders and shows that they have been around for much longer than we...
I mean, true, but now you're saying that... I don't like this. If there's... Okay, we had one combustion bender, then we have another one, and now we have just 3. Like, how is combustion bending, like, not a common thing at this point, right? If there are so many of them, and they're pretty much perfect assassins if you think about it a little bit, they just literally need to see you, and then they can boop, and no one even knows what's happening, right? because you're not actually supposed to see the combustion thing. I'm pretty sure that's just for us viewers, that we see like a stream of air or whatever. That's actually invisible as far as I can tell. So, yeah, I think it kind of cheapens combustion bending, considering how OP and dangerous it is. That now everyone's suddenly a combustion bender, you know?
We thought, especially much longer than the time of Aang. Either way, Yang Chen eventually confronts these dangerous combustion benders one at a time with her team, and they discover the first one inside of a safe house. Now, mysteriously, Yang Chen demands that she enters the first safe house alone without the rest of her squad, and you're about to find out why. When she enters the room, she confronts the combustion bender, and in a shocking act that is highly forbidden by the air nomads of the time, she sucks the air out of the room, suffocating the combustion man to the point where he blacks out. Yang Chen is careful not to kill the combustion bender or herself, but even still, this is an extremely dangerous and
I mean, yeah, considering, well, fire, yeah, fire's not supposed to exactly work without air and whatnot. Oh, but explosions are a little bit different. So, she technically should have actually probably lost.
highly forbidden technique. Now, if she had killed the combustion bender using this technique, she may have had to pay for it with her own life, as airbending demands balance. This may also explain why Gyatso couldn't save himself using the exact same method. She then did this exact same thing for the second combustion bender before requiring some help to take out the
airbending. I do not agree with this idea that airbending requires balance. I think airbending requires a specific state of mind to achieve things. Like, Zahir got the ability to fly not because of any kind of magical balance, but because of a literal state of mind he was able to achieve it.
The third one. What a shocking display for such a peaceful avatar, or at least, that's what Aang believed. At the end of this whole affair, Yang Chen did something possibly even darker. She locked up the 3 combustion benders at different locations around the city and put an end to the Unanimity project, meaning the Shungs were in deep trouble. They all went into hiding, and Yang Chen basically took control of the city as its administrator, and then to cover all of these events up, she fled to Ba Sing Se, calling the whole event a spiritual imbalance. Yang Chen was certainly much more of a grey avatar than any of us thought in the past. This shocking use of air depletion both foreshadows it being an explanation for Gyatso's death and gives precedent in universe. This is why I am 100% convinced the Monk Gyatso went out with a highly forbidden airbending technique that would make most modern day airbenders wince. What do you guys think? Thanks so much.
I think we're gonna have a little bit more forbidden airbending techniques in the future. Like, you know, the possibilities are very endless. The possibilities are very, very, very endless. You know, I'm just waiting for a firebender to be able to shoot lightning into the clouds and then control where it lands. That would be pretty good. Anyway, very interesting avatar. Amazing stuff. Anyway, this was Chris Sid. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you haven't done anything. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.